This gala isn't for people like you. Try the staff entrance." The words cut through the Wall Street gala like broken glass. Laughter followed, high-pitched, dripping with arrogance. It came from a young white billionaire draped in a short red dress, sequins catching the chandelier light like sparks off a blade. She stood with a circle of heirs and bankers, smirking over the rim of her champagne flute. All eyes turned, conversations froze, even the orchestra's strings wavered. At the center of it all stood a black woman in a simple orange dress. No diamonds, no designer clutch. Just a tailored gown that moved like quiet fire with every step, and hair tied back in a low, immaculate bun. Her presence was composed, steady, so steady it unsettled the room. She didn't react. Not a flinch, not a word. She simply adjusted the glass of water in her hand. The billionaire heiress tilted her head, voice rising again for the crowd. "Orange? Really? That's catering staff attire." The smirk spread to her friends. A ripple of cruel amusement danced across their faces. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or to look away. But the woman in orange, the one mocked as if she didn't belong, remained still. Her silence pressed heavier than any outburst could. And that silence carried history. It carried boardrooms where she had been underestimated, contracts where she had been dismissed, doors where she had been told she didn't fit the image. Yet here she was, in the very hall her company had helped fund, watching arrogance repeat its script, word for word. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to her. Her name was not yet spoken, her power not yet shown. But every second she stayed silent, the gala bent further toward a reckoning. Because in that moment, amid crystal chandeliers, velvet gowns, and careless cruelty, the stage was no longer theirs. It was hers. And when her voice finally broke the silence, Wall Street would never forget the sound. The ballroom pulsed with opulence. Gold trim lined the walls. A 40-piece orchestra played softly at the far end, and every corner shimmered with Wall Street wealth on display. Yet the woman in orange moved through it with the calm of someone visiting her own living room. Her name, Amara Lewis, 40, 2 years old, quiet strength woven into every step. Tonight she chose no diamond necklace, no dramatic cape, just the orange dress, precise in its simplicity, a reflection of her philosophy. Power doesn't need to scream, it needs to stand. Few in the room recognized her face. That was intentional. Amara never chased the spotlight. She built it. She preferred contracts over cameras, outcomes over appearances. While others flashed their influence with tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns, she blended into the crowd, observing, testing. And the gala was the perfect test. Hosted in the heart of Manhattan, this annual Wall Street event gathered hedge fund titans, billionaire heirs, and global investors. The ballroom air was thick with ambition deals whispered over champagne, partnerships forged between dances. The price of a raised eyebrow here could equal billions outside these walls. But Amara walked in alone. No entourage, no PR team, no husband at her side, just her presence. And that presence was enough to draw both curiosity and contempt. Her history had taught her the cost of appearances. At 27, she was denied entry to a private banking lounge in Zurich for not fitting the profile. At 33, a hotel manager in Paris demanded a second ID before allowing her to check in, while white men behind her breezed through without question. Each slight became a stone, and she had built an empire out of those stones. Now, that empire stretched across continents, a holdings company valued at over $40 billion, partnerships in tech, real estate, hospitality. And tonight, the deal everyone whispered about, the $6 billion partnership with the very billionaire in red who had just mocked her, was set to be finalized. No one in the room knew that. Not yet. All they saw was a black woman in a dress too bold for their taste, walking alone through a sea of money and diamonds. And all they assumed was that she didn't belong. The red dress heiress had voiced what many only thought. Try the staff entrance. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of hierarchy, a reminder of who they believed deserved to stand on this carpet. But Amara knew better. She had seen this script before, and she had written its ending 1,000 times. So she stayed silent. She observed. She let the whispers gather, let the looks linger. because every second of underestimation was another second of rope they tied around themselves. Tonight, the gala thought it was a celebration of wealth and legacy. But before it ended, it would become something else entirely. À leçon. The orchestra's violins swelled, but they couldn't drown the sting of laughter echoing near the marble staircase. The young billionaire in red leaned closer to her circle of friends, her voice sharpened so everyone nearby could hear. "Did you see the cut of that dress? Orange satin? Looks like clearance rack." Another heir chuckled into his glass. Or maybe she borrowed it from catering. The circle erupted in quiet, practiced amusement. It was the kind of cruelty that didn't need volume, it thrived on audience. Their eyes flicked to Amara, waiting for a flinch, waiting for proof that the insult had landed. But Amara didn't give them that. She adjusted the thin gold belt at her waist, sipped her water, and scanned the room with the calm of someone conducting an audit. Her silence unsettled them more than any outburst could. The heiress in red stepped forward, blocking Amara's path with the weight of entitlement. Her glass tilted, champagne threatening to spill. "You must be lost," she said, her smile painted but venomous. "The sponsors' lounge is on the other side. This section is for real partners." "Who dat?" Whispers stirred through the guests around them. Some leaned in, curious. Others looked away, complicit in silence. A pair of junior bankers near the bar exchanged nervous glances. One mouthed, "She's crossing the line." Still, Amara didn't move. Her poise was deliberate, almost surgical. She had been here before, maybe not this ballroom, not this exact chandelier glow, but in boardrooms, hotels, banks, airports. The script was always the same. Dismissal first, recognition later. The red dress heiress wasn't done. She let her gaze travel from Amara's bun, to the bare wrist, to the unbranded clutch. "No jewels, no designer tag, no +1, she said, each word loud enough for the cameras circling nearby. "Honey, even interns dress better at these things." Her friends laughed louder this time, emboldened. A photographer, sensing drama, angled his lens toward the scene. The flash illuminated Amara's face for a heartbeat, still, steady, unreadable. From across the room, a young reporter muttered, "That's Amara Lewis, isn't it? Why is she letting this happen?" His cameraman whispered back, "Because the story isn't finished yet." The laughter swelled again, cruel and careless. The billionaire heiress raised her glass like a dagger poised above prey. "Don't worry," she added with a grin. "We'll find you a uniform. Black and white suits you better than orange." The orchestra faltered again. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. They didn't know her yet, but they were about to. Because Amara Lewis never raised her voice at the start of a storm. She let others write their arrogance into the air first. And tonight, the ink was running bold and permanent. The gala had become a stage, and the heiress in red had just delivered her opening act. The next act would not belong to her. The sting of laughter still lingered, rippling like static across the ballroom. Guests shifted uneasily in their polished shoes, some pretending not to hear, others secretly waiting for the woman in orange to snap back. That was the script they expected. Anger, outrage, a scene to dismiss later as unprofessional. But Amara Lewis did none of that. She placed her glass of water gently on a passing tray, adjusted the thin belt at her waist, and stood her ground as if her heels were anchored to the marble floor. Her expression was unreadable, not cold, not flustered, simply still. That stillness unsettled the room more than any retort could. The red-dress billionaire tilted her head, waiting, hungry for a reaction. None came. Only the silence, heavy and deliberate, pressing against the orchestra's faltering notes. Amara's eyes swept the circle in front of her, then beyond them to the glittering crowd. She saw faces trying not to meet hers, people pretending to check their phones, others leaning closer to eavesdrop. She knew this pattern well. The cruelty of one was never just one, it drew in the silence of dozens. Yet her posture never broke. One hand rested lightly at her side, the other clasped the clutch with steady grace. Inside, though, memory stirred. She remembered Zurich at 27, standing in a velvet-lined banking lounge when a manager told her, "This section isn't for you." She remembered the sting of Paris at 33, watching 3 white men check into suites without question while she was asked for a second, then a third ID. She remembered sleeping in her car at 24 after being denied a hotel room in Atlanta. She remembered every moment she was told she didn't belong. And now, here again, Under chandeliers worth more than some countries' budgets, the script repeated. But Amara knew the power of patience. She had built an empire on silence that others mistook for weakness. And she understood something the red-dressed billionaire never would. That restraint wasn't surrender, it was strategy. A nearby server hesitated, caught between duty and discomfort. He glanced at Amara as if silently apologizing for being in the orbit of insult. She met his eyes briefly, then looked away, calm as ever. That single look said enough. Do not carry my burden. Watch instead. The billionaire laughed again, the sound brittle like glass about to crack. No words? Figures. She turned to her friends, raising her glass. Some people just don't know their place. Still, Amara said nothing. But in that silence, the atmosphere shifted. It no longer felt like she was the one on trial. It was the room. Every second her calm held, the cruelty exposed itself sharper, uglier, undeniable. The Gala thought it had cornered her into humiliation. What they didn't realize was that Amara had cornered them without speaking a single word. And that silence would echo far louder than champagne glasses ever could. The orchestra tried to recover, sliding into a softer refrain, but the tension in the room had already drowned the music. The insult hung like smoke that refused to clear. Some guests tried to laugh it off. Others turned back to their champagne, but the moment was too heavy to vanish. At the edge of the ballroom, a young journalist clutched his phone tighter. His press badge swung lightly against his tux as he whispered, "This doesn't look right." Without waiting for approval, he tapped record. The red light blinked on. His camera caught the heiress in red leaning close, smirking, her glass raised like a weapon, and the woman in orange motionless, dignified, unflinching. Nearby, two junior bankers had been whispering since the first insult. One finally spoke, voice low but edged with conviction. "Why's no one stopping this? She hasn't even said a word." His colleague nodded, glancing nervously at the heiress's circle. "Because that's how this room works. They laugh and the rest stay quiet." But the silence was beginning to crack. At a table near the stage, a woman in her 50s, pearls gleaming against her black gown, leaned toward her husband. "I don't know who she is, but that woman doesn't deserve this." Her husband frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "Careful," he muttered. "You don't want to cross them." Still, her phone slid out of her clutch. Screen angled, camera pointed. It only took one. Soon, another guest lifted his phone, then another. Quiet movements, subtle but undeniable. A ripple of red recording lights began to glow across the ballroom like embers sparking in the dark. The heiress noticed. Her smile tightened. She tossed her hair, pretending not to care, but her voice grew louder, sharper, feeding off her own bravado. "See? Not even a word. That's all you need to know." But the crowd's eyes weren't on her anymore. They were on the still figure in orange, the woman who hadn't broken, who hadn't defended, who stood with the kind of poise that made cruelty look small. At the back of the room, a young caterer set down his tray, fists clenching. He'd seen enough of these scenes to recognize the pattern. He whispered to himself, "Not again." For a moment, it looked like he might step forward, but Amara's calm presence held him back. She didn't need saving. She needed witnesses. And now, she had them. The cameras kept rising. The whispers kept spreading. Guests who had looked away were now leaning in, watching closely. Something was shifting, not loud, not sudden, but inevitable. The heiress laughed again, brittle, desperate to keep the stage, but the sound didn't land the way it had minutes before. Instead of applause, it met silence. Silence and the quiet click of dozens of phones capturing every frame. Amara still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to, because the room was beginning to speak for her. The ballroom had changed. Where there had been laughter, there was now unease. Where the heiress in red expected applause, she found only silence and the faint glow of recording phones. Her jaw tightened. The smirk stayed, but cracks formed at the edges. She lifted her glass again, forcing her voice above the orchestra. "Do you know what this reminds me of?" she said, her tone theatrical, eyes locked on Amara. "That time last year when a woman tried to sneak into our investor dinner. She had a fake pass, a borrowed dress, and thought no one would notice. Security had her out in 5 minutes. Her friends laughed on cue, but the sound rang hollow. The heiress stepped closer, close enough that the scent of her perfume cut through the air, sharp and invasive. She looked Amara up and down, eyes narrowing with disdain. No jewels, no credentials, no seat at any real table. She let the words hang, then delivered the strike. Tell me whose +1 are you? The crowd stiffened. Even those who wanted to look away couldn't. Every insult was another spark, another moment seared into dozens of live recordings. Amara didn't move. Her hands stayed at her sides, posture unbroken. The heiress wasn't done. She circled slightly, her red dress shimmering under the chandelier like a warning flare. Orange satin. A low bun. Not even a necklace. You look like staff. Maybe a hostess who wandered too far from her post. Gasps murmured through the room. A man in the corner muttered, "That's too far." His companion hushed him quickly, but the words had been heard. The heiress leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate, but loud enough for the mics and cameras nearby. "You don't belong here. You never will." She straightened, flashing her practiced smile to the crowd, as though she had delivered a punchline. Her friends chuckled obediently, raising their glasses in mock cheers. But their laughter no longer filled the room, because the silence surrounding Amara wasn't weakness. It was gravity. Guests felt it pressing, drawing their attention away from the red dress, back to the still figure in orange who hadn't broken once. For years, the heiress had lived on the power of her last name, her looks, her unchecked arrogance. Tonight, she believed she was untouchable. She believed the insult was hers to control. But with every word, every smirk, every careless gesture, she was writing her own downfall. The gala no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a trial. And the heiress had just declared herself guilty. The orchestra tried again to mask the tension, bowstrings trembling over polished wood. But music could not cover what was about to break. The heiress in red swirled her champagne flute, golden bubbles catching the light like sparks before a fire. Her smirk had hardened into something colder desperation laced with entitlement. Too many cameras were raised now, too many eyes locked on her cruelty. And yet, instead of retreating, she lunged further. She stepped into Amara's space, so close that the reflection of her dress shimmered against the orange satin. Her words came sharp, like needles dipped in sugar. "Still nothing? Not even a word?" She tilted her head, her blonde curls brushing her shoulder. "That's the problem. People like you never know when to leave." Gasps murmured at the phrasing. "People like you." It landed heavy, deliberate, undeniable, and then the act that shattered the room. With a flick of her wrist, she tipped her glass forward. A stream of champagne spilled to the marble, splattering droplets near Amara's heels. The liquid crept toward the hem of her gown, darkening the satin where it touched. The sound wasn't loud, just a soft splash. But the silence that followed was deafening. Dozens of guests froze mid-breath. The servers halted, trays trembling. A photographer's flash captured the exact moment the liquid hit the floor, a bright scar seared into memory. The heiress feigned innocence, lips curling upward. "Oops," she purred, her voice dripping false sweetness. "Guess orange stains easily." Her friends laughed again, but this time it was uneasy, fractured, their voices stumbling over discomfort. A few shifted back, realizing the cameras were still rolling, still watching. Amara looked down briefly, studying the small patch of damp fabric. Then she lifted her gaze, not to the heiress, not to the crowd, but straight ahead, calm, unshaken, her posture unbroken. That look alone pulled the breath from the room. A young banker whispered, "She's finished her own career." His colleague shook his head. "Number, she just finished something else." The heiress twirled the empty flute between her fingers, triumphant in her own mind, blind to the weight of what she had unleashed. She believed humiliation was complete. She believed the room belonged to her again. But humiliation wasn't in the orange dress. It was in the act itself, broadcast live, recorded by dozens of witnesses, forever etched into the memory of Wall Street's most gilded night. And as the champagne spread wider across the marble, so too did the sense that the gala had reached a point of no return. The insult was no longer just words. It was action. It was visible. It was undeniable. And Amara Lewis, silent, steady, stood in the center of it all, waiting. The storm had reached its peak. What came next would tear the night apart. The champagne still glistened on the marble, a golden stain spreading like a wound across the floor. The heiress in red twirled her empty glass, her laughter brittle but defiant, clinging to the illusion of control. But the room no longer belonged to her. Amara Lewis straightened her shoulders, her calm presence amplifying against the chaos. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move quickly. She simply reached into her clutch and drew out her phone, the motion as precise as a signature across a billion-dollar contract. One tap. "Activate protocol," she said softly, her words crisp and measured. Not to the heiress, not to the crowd, but into the small microphone pressed against her lapel. Hidden in plain sight, it connected instantly to her team. A green light blinked at the corner of the ballroom. One of her aides, dressed like any other guest, stood and began discreetly recording from a second angle. Across the city, in a glass tower overlooking the skyline, her assistant's phone buzzed to life. Screens lit up. A boardroom call connected. The heiress blinked, confused. "What's this?" she scoffed, but the edge of her bravado faltered. Amara lifted her eyes for the first time since the champagne had fallen. They were steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of 1,000 boardrooms and battles won in silence. "Record everything," she instructed. Her voice was calm, yet it rippled through the gala louder than any insult that had come before. "And connect me to the board." Ugh. Her aide's voice confirmed through her earpiece. "We're live, Madam Lewis. Every director is watching." A murmur swept through the crowd. "Madam Lewis?" The name spread in whispers, gaining speed. "Amara Lewis?" One banker gasped. "That's her?" The heiress laughed again, brittle. "What board? What are you pretending to—" But her words stumbled against the rising tide of recognition. Guests who had dismissed the woman in orange moments before now pieced the truth together. They remembered headlines. They remembered numbers. They remembered the $6 billion deal that was rumored to finalize tonight. And the realization struck like lightning. The woman mocked, humiliated, drenched in champagne was not an outsider. She was the deal, the anchor, the gravity beneath the entire evening. Phones rose higher. Cameras zoomed closer. The crowd shifted away from the heiress, toward the woman in orange, who suddenly stood taller than the chandeliers above them. Amara's silence had been her shield, but now her words would be the blade. And with a calmness that terrified more than rage ever could, she prepared to cut. The room buzzed in whispers, disbelief passing from one table to the next. "Madam Lewis, it can't be." Eyes darted between the orange dress and the heiress in red, the balance of power beginning to tilt. Amara Lewis finally lifted her chin. She didn't raise her hand for silence, she didn't need to. The hush came on its own, spreading outward like ripples on water until even the orchestra lowered their bows, strings fading into stillness. She spoke. "You just insulted the CEO funding tonight's gala." Her voice rang clear, steady, every syllable deliberate. "And the partner behind your $6 billion deal." The words landed like a verdict. The billionaire heiress blinked, stunned. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Around her, the circle of friends shifted, unease breaking through their forced smiles. Someone in the back dropped a glass. The shatter echoed like punctuation. Amara let the silence hang, then continued, her tone sharper now, precise as a blade. "You assumed I was staff. You assumed I was an outsider. But it's my signature that keeps your empire afloat. My funding that built the very stage you're standing on. And tonight, in front of every witness, you revealed more about yourself than I ever could." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Some guests clapped hands over their mouths, others simply stared, frozen. The journalist near the wall whispered into his phone, "It's confirmed. That's Amara Lewis. The Amara Lewis." His live stream comments exploded in real time, flooding with disbelief and outrage. The heiress's face flushed crimson, matching her dress. She stammered, reaching for words for control. You can't. This is ridiculous." But no one was laughing anymore. No one was backing her cruelty. The room had turned, and the cameras caught everything. Amara's eyes swept across the crowd, landing briefly on those who had looked away earlier, those who had smirked along with the insult. She didn't need to call them out by name. Their silence was already recorded. Then she returned her gaze to the heiress. Calm, unwavering, inevitable. "This gala isn't yours to define," she said, voice low but carrying across the hall. It never was. For a moment, the air itself seemed to still, as if the chandeliers, the marble, the orchestra, and every guest inside the ballroom leaned in to absorb the words. And in that stillness, power shifted completely. The heiress wasn't the center anymore. She wasn't the story. She wasn't even the punchline. Amara Lewis was. And for the first time all evening, Wall Street realized who truly owned the room. The gala erupted not in applause, not in laughter, but in stunned, tangled silence. A ripple of shock moved through the ballroom like a wave hitting glass. Guests who had been sipping champagne moments before now froze mid-motion. The billionaire heiress stood rooted, eyes wide, face drained of color beneath the heat of the chandeliers. Her glass trembled in her hand, the last drop of champagne quivering before spilling to the floor. Phones were everywhere now, screens glowing, cameras pointed, feeds live. In seconds, the confrontation had jumped from ballroom gossip to global broadcast. Across the room, the journalist who had been streaming whispered into his mic, his voice urgent. "You're watching history unfold at the Wall Street Gala. That's Amara Lewis. Yes, the Amara Lewis." And she just exposed the heiress behind the $6 billion deal. His live stream comments exploded. "Unbelievable. This is bigger than business." Finally, someone stood up. Servers stood frozen with trays balanced mid-air, their uniforms suddenly heavier on their shoulders. One young caterer whispered under his breath, "She's the CEO? All this time?" The realization gave him a strange, quiet pride, like watching someone win a war he never thought could be fought. At a nearby table, an elderly banker pushed his chair back, his voice sharp with regret. "We laughed. We actually laughed." His wife hushed him, tears in her eyes. "We didn't know," she whispered. But the excuse crumbled even as she said it. The friends who had flanked the heiress in red shuffled backward, their loyalty evaporating. One muttered, "I told you to stop," though he hadn't. Another set his glass down, suddenly fascinated with the floor. No one wanted to be aligned with her anymore. Not when the truth had detonated this way. And the heiress, her arrogance cracked. Her voice, caught in her throat, stammered useless fragments. This isn't, she can't." But every denial sounded thinner than the last, drowned out by the relentless click of cameras, the rising tide of whispers. "Amara Lewis, the CEO, $6 billion. The orchestra musicians exchanged glances, bows lowered. Even they knew the performance was over, and not just their music. It wasn't just embarrassment filling the room now. It was fear. Fear of association. Fear of being remembered on the wrong side of the moment. Guests subtly shifted their positions, inching away from the heiress, angling closer toward Amara as though proximity could cleanse them. The red dress no longer looked radiant. It looked like a warning flare burning out. And at the center of it all stood Amara Lewis, composed, unbroken, her silence turned into thunder. She hadn't needed to raise her hand or her voice. The truth itself had done the heavy lifting. The gala was collapsing under the weight of revelation. And for the heiress, there was no escape. The whispers had grown into a storm. Cameras flashed, screens glowed, and every face in the ballroom leaned toward the woman in orange. The heiress in red clutched her glass like a lifeline, her smirk long gone, her lips trembling for words that refused to come. Amara Lewis let the silence stretch just long enough to make the weight unbearable. Then, with the precision of a judge delivering sentence, she spoke. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice steady and resonant. "Our $6 billion partnership is canceled." The words detonated through the hall. Gasps cracked the air. A man dropped his fork. The metallic clang echoed like a gavel. Someone else whispered a stunned, "$6 billion," as if repeating the number might make it less real. Amara continued, unflinching. "Contracts are more than signatures on paper. They are built on respect, trust, integrity. Tonight you showed this room who you are, and I will not invest billions in arrogance and contempt." Her words cut sharper than any insult ever could. The heiress staggered forward, her voice breaking. You can't do that. We have agreements, negotiations." Amara met her eyes, unwavering. "Agreements are not cages, and this isn't negotiation, it's conclusion." A murmur rippled through the guests, bankers and investors calculating in real time what a collapsed $6 billion deal meant. Stocks, futures, reputations. The heiress's empire, already fragile beneath the veneer of privilege, teetered visibly in the balance. One journalist's voice, live on stream, carried over the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing the end of a partnership that was supposed to reshape Wall Street." His feed's comment section exploded with fire emojis, shock, and a single refrain. "She ended it, right there." The heiress shook her head violently, her voice cracking into a shriek. "You can't! You won't! You need us. But Amara raised her hand, silencing her without raising her volume. Need? Number? She let the word rest, heavy and undeniable. I don't need your empire. I don't need your approval. I don't need to stand under chandeliers to know my worth. The room seemed to exhale as she delivered the final strike. You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake. The applause began cautiously, a single pair of hands clapping near the back, then another, then a ripple spreading across the hall until the sound swelled into a thunderous ovation. Servers, journalists, bankers all joined, not for spectacle, but for the gravity of justice they had just witnessed. The heiress collapsed back into her chair, pale, hollow, her red dress no longer a symbol of power but a stain of arrogance unraveling. And Amara Lewis, calm, commanding, stood taller than the chandeliers above her. The deal was dead. Her dignity was alive, and the balance of the room would never return to what it was before. The ovation rolled through the ballroom like thunder caught in crystal walls. Dozens of guests on their feet, some clapping to drown their own shame, others clapping because they had witnessed something rare, dignity stronger than spectacle. Amara Lewis didn't bow. She didn't wave. She didn't acknowledge the applause. She simply picked up her clutch from the tray where she had set her glass earlier and turned toward the grand staircase. Her heels struck the marble with slow precision. Each step echoed louder than the orchestra ever had. The cameras followed, phones still lifted high, but she never turned back to them. She wasn't leaving to prove anything. She was leaving because the night was already finished. Behind her, the heiress in red sat motionless, her laughter shattered, her empire crumbling in whispers. No one circled her now. No one defended her. Even her closest friends had melted into the crowd, faces pale with the realization that they had clapped along to arrogance until it burned them. The journalist's voice cracked through the live stream. She walked away, just like that. The deal is dead. The heiress is finished. And Amara Lewis... He paused, his voice thick with awe. She didn't shout once. At the doors, a young caterer stepped aside, lowering his tray respectfully as she passed. Their eyes met for half a breath, and in that silence, he understood the lesson he'd carry forever. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, watches, and then moves with absolute precision. The doors opened. Cold Manhattan air rushed in, sweeping away the perfume and champagne, replacing it with the city's raw pulse. Amara stepped out, her orange dress catching the light of street lamps, glowing like fire against the night. Behind her, the Gala unraveled phones buzzing, reputations collapsing, deals dissolving in panic. But none of that touched her. She had done what she came to do, not to scream, not to plead, to stand, to endure, to remind them that justice doesn't need volume, it needs presence. As her driver opened the black car door, Amara paused only once. She looked back at the glowing building, chandeliers blazing through glass, a temple of wealth that had just witnessed its own lesson. Her voice was quiet, spoken only to herself, but it carried into the night. Power doesn't shout, it executes. And with that, she stepped inside, the door closing softly, decisively. The car pulled away, leaving the Gala behind. And in its wake, the world carried the story not of a humiliation, but of a reckoning.